Set in Germany, a press conference is about to be covered by several news cameramen. One of them is Armin, a man who took the job as a cameraman on short notice because he was in desperate need of money. However, Armin appears confused while operating the camera. He doesn't even understand how to use the record button, resulting in him missing many important moments. His colleague quickly checks Armin's footage, but it turns out to be disappointing, which enrages their boss. Furious at Armin's careless mistakes, the boss scolds him severely. Armin, however, stubbornly tries to defend himself, asking his boss to be more understanding. This only makes the boss angrier, leading to Armin being fired on the spot. Fortunately, Armin's kind-hearted colleague offers to help by lending him some money. After receiving the loan, instead of using it wisely, Armin heads to a nightclub. There, his male friends tease him, pointing out that he's too old for such a place, as Armin is a 40-year-old bachelor whose life is constantly in disarray. Inside the nightclub, Armin meets a young woman who happens to be the daughter of a friend. Armin treats her to a night out, and they eventually end up at his apartment. The mood in the room is dull since Armin is not good at flirting. Although they plan to get intimate, there is nothing romantic about the situation. Armin awkwardly suggests they start in bed, but the girl feels bored and decides to brush her teeth first. Armin advises her to use a new toothbrush, explaining that he doesn't want to pass bacteria into her mouth. Armin's remark and behavior offend the girl, leading her to leave abruptly. Without much reaction, Armin lets her go and continues brushing his teeth as usual. After a while, the girl returns, but only to grab her forgotten bag, and then she leaves for good. The next morning, Armin walks through the midst of a demonstration as the city appears unstable, making it even harder for him to find work. Armin's father calls, informing him that his grandmother is gravely ill. Naturally, Armin wants to visit her, but his father seems to discourage him from coming. Despite this, Armin decides to head to his family's home. While driving, his car radio broadcasts news that Russia has taken over Crimea, leading the US to intervene. American leaders are reportedly gathering for further discussions. However, Armin appears uninterested in any of the news, lost in thought about his family, especially since he hasn't been home in years. When Armin arrives at the family house, he sees a doctor examining his grandmother. The doctor checks her throat, but it seems there is little hope for recovery. Armin's father tells him that the grandmother has been bedridden for years due to old age, relying on a respirator to help her breathe. That night, Armin tries to send a message to his mother, Renette, who lives separately from the family. He wants to tell her that he is home and that his grandmother is in critical condition, but he hesitates and ends up cancelling the message. Unable to sleep, Armin visits his grandmother's room and sees how exhausted his father is from caring for her. Armin lies beside his grandmother, falling asleep in her arms. Shortly after, his father wakes him up, telling him to go to his own room. Armin asks his father why he never considered placing the grandmother in a nursing home. His father explains that it wasn't an option because he's too lonely. They have a light conversation while watching TV. Then a woman named Lilo arrives, bringing groceries. Armin introduces himself to her. In the kitchen, Armin's father approaches Lilo, and she asks whether Armin knows about their relationship. The father replies that he hasn't told him. Lilo and Armin's father then try to comfort the grandmother by playing classical music, while Armin grows more curious about what they are hiding. They all continue eating together. Armin's father mentions that Lilo is his colleague and a council member, and he begins praising her extensively. Armin grows annoyed as his father keeps highlighting Lilo's virtues. Armin then makes some derogatory remarks about Lilo's position, which offends her, prompting her to leave. After Lilo is gone, Armin's father confides in him, revealing that he has started a new relationship with Lilo, something Armin's mother, Renee, doesn't know about yet. Years ago, Renee chose to leave him without a word, leaving him lonely for a long time. Armin tells him to stop talking because he doesn't really care about any of it. His father then asks Armin if he ever wants to have children. Armin replies that he never wants to have kids now or in the future. While staying with his father, Armin often goes out alone at night to smoke outside. He meets his neighbor Lothar and his dog Cosmos. Lothar invites Armin to go hunting with him, but Armin declines, not wanting to disrupt the hunt. The next day, Armin spends time with his grandmother. His father comes in to take over caring for her, and Armin goes to make coffee for his father. Suddenly, his father calls him with a devastated look in his eyes. Armin rushes in and discovers that his grandmother has passed away. Together, they remove her medical equipment, and Armin prepares clothes for her funeral. His father sits in silence, lost in thought, and then asks Armin to leave him alone. Armin offers to call his mother to inform her of the sad news, but his father refuses, not wanting to disrupt her life. Armin's father is clearly under immense emotional strain, filled with guilt and unwilling to ask for help from either his wife or his son. This creates an awkward tension between them, made worse by his new relationship with Lilo, which would undoubtedly upset his estranged wife even more. Yet Armin understands his father, which causes his father to break down in tears. Despite his father's wishes, Armin still goes to see his mother to deliver the sad news. When Armin arrives at his mother's separate home, he finds her cheerfully practicing with her choir. Seeing her in such a happy mood, Armin cannot bring himself to tell her about the death of his grandmother. Instead, he leaves crying. Like his father, Armin is overwhelmed by the awkwardness and guilt that pervade his life. Armin then seeks out a drink and goes to a quiet spot under a bridge to be alone. It is in this solitude that Armin feels most comfortable. From a distance, he saw a group of people partying on a boat passing by, just looking at the people who were having fun. Finally, he fell asleep there until morning. Armin wakes up in his car, unaware that something is wrong with his surroundings. He heads to a nearby store to buy a pack of cigarettes, but upon arrival, the store is eerily empty and unattended. He calls out for the shopkeeper, but there's no response. Groceries appear to have been left behind, as if someone left in a hurry. With no one to assist him, Armin takes the cigarettes and leaves money on the counter. When he steps outside, he's puzzled by the desolate environment. Many vehicles are parked without their owners, and at a gas station, several cars are left with fuel nozzles still in place, abandoned like the store. Growing anxious, Armin drives through the city, observing the emptiness all around. His car eventually stops when he encounters a street full of abandoned motorcycles. Stepping out to investigate, he notices the nightclub boat from the previous night, now deserted and stranded in the river. Armin begins to panic and rushes home. Once there, he hurriedly tries to get inside, but the door is locked and no one responds to his shouts. In desperation, he breaks the glass door with a metal object, only to find that his father is missing as well. Panicked, Armin searches for his father, but to no avail. He checks Lothar's house next, but it's the same. Everyone has vanished. Armin feels a bit relieved when he finds Lothar's dog, Cosmos, although the dog seems stressed. Armin brings Cosmos back to his house and then goes to check his grandmother's room. Strangely, his grandmother's body is still lying there, undisturbed. Armin tries to use his phone to contact someone, but the signal is suddenly gone and the water tap doesn't work, signaling that the electricity is out. Moments later, Cosmos suddenly yelps in pain. Armin discovers that the dog is injured from the broken glass door. He tries to help Cosmos survive, but in the end, the dog dies. As night falls, everything is engulfed in darkness. Armin takes Lothar's rifle for protection and barricades himself in the bathroom. Unsure of what else to do, he swallows some pills and alcohol, nearly poisoning himself to death. The next morning, Armin wakes up in his room. He starts cleaning his dirty clothes, then takes a bath using the remaining drinking water. Without dressing, he goes to his grandmother's body. Armin decides to cremate her in her room by piling books and using fuel as a fire starter. As the house begins to burn, Armin flees and dresses outside, then drives through the city. He arrives at a factory which is just as abandoned. Continuing his journey, he is blocked by a closed toll gate. Armin breaks through it and finds more deserted cars. Armin stumbles upon a luxury police car that is still fully operational. Without hesitation, he takes it for a joyride, recklessly speeding through the empty cities. Eventually, Armin nearly crashes into another car, blocking his way in a tunnel. He hears movement, but it turns out to be a pair of trapped horses. After freeing them, Armin resumes driving around the desolate landscape. Months have passed, but Armin still hasn't found any other humans, and he now lives in the forest. He hunts for fresh food, and whenever he finds useful animals, he takes them back to his cabin to raise them. He finds a goat, which he brings to his modest shelter, where he has already prepared a pen filled with various animals. His cabin is simple, built from wood and straw walls. Realizing that his food supply will eventually run out, Armin begins farming with the help of his horse. He bathes joyfully in the river, feeling that his life is now more meaningful and self-sufficient. The hopelessness that once filled him has transformed into energy and purpose, and he lovingly cares for his animals while making some of his own clothes. One night, as Armin is sewing, his machine suddenly stops working due to a power outage. When he checks, he notices that his fuel is running low, meaning he'll need to start conserving it. He spends the rest of the night reading a novel until he hears his goat crying. It turns out the goat is giving birth to a kid. The next day, Armin heads to the river to repair a water wheel he had previously built. However, due to his limited strength, he is swept away by the river's strong current. The cold water makes him feel slightly feverish. To prevent himself from getting sick, he tries to treat himself by inhaling steam. While doing this, an alarm suddenly goes off, and he sees that the newborn kid has been taken away by a fox. Furious, Armin grabs his rifle and chases after the fox, but his efforts are in vain. He returns, heartbroken, to the mother goat and apologizes for failing her. Moments later, Armin hears the distant sound of the kid and quickly mounts his horse to search for it. He rides through the wilderness, seeing that the city has transformed into a wild forest. He stops by a mall, which has been overtaken by vines and shrubs, and collects some food that is still edible. As he continues his journey home, Armin spots a strange car parked near the river. Suddenly, the fox carrying the kid runs by, and Armin immediately gives chase. He manages to aim at it, but the fox attacks him, causing him to fall and lose consciousness from the impact. At night, a mysterious person approaches and finds food as well as Armin's unconscious body. The stranger also discovers a dead dog nearby. The next morning, Armin wakes up by the river, covered in a thermal blanket. Confused, he realizes his trusty rifle is missing. Without thinking too much about it, he takes his horse and returns to his cabin, feeling the pain from the wound in his leg. Once home, Armin examines the wound in the mirror and concludes that someone else must have saved him. That night, a vehicle approaches his cabin. Armin rushes out cautiously and sees that it's the same vehicle he had seen before. The intruder turns out to be a woman with a rifle, and Armin is powerless in her presence. He hands over his wooden weapon, and the woman, speaking in a foreign language, says that her dog was killed. It turns out that the animal Armin shot was actually her dog. The woman spares him and leaves. The next morning, Armin wakes up to a noise coming from the backyard. He sees the woman hasn't left and is rummaging through his things while coughing. Armin watches as she grabs one of his chickens and kills it. Weak from his injury, he drifts back to sleep. When he wakes again, he finds a pot of chicken soup beside him, which he quickly devours, savoring the meal. The woman approaches and introduces herself as Kersey. She feels pity for Armin's condition and begins treating the bite wound on his leg. That night, Kersey chooses to sleep in her van, but later, while Armin is asleep, she sneaks into the cabin and lies beside him. She watches him for a moment before leaving, unaware that Armin is only pretending to be asleep. The following morning, Armin tries to milk his goat and Kersey returns to change his bandages. They share a meal together, one of Armin's favorite dishes. Kersey asks him why he stays in one place when he could explore other areas. Armin responds that this is where his family is from and he will never leave his homeland. While eating, Kersey notices Armin's intense gaze. When he asks if she has met anyone else, Kersey tells him that he is the only person she has encountered. Armin then reaches out to touch her arm gently, but Kersey pulls away, feeling uncomfortable, and leaves. Armin remains silent, unsure of what to do next. He resumes his usual activities, such as tending to his ducks. The next day, Kersey came looking for Armin, expressing her happiness to see him doing well. They shared a long gaze and eventually shared a romantic moment, marking the beginning of their life together. Since Kersey's arrival, they often went into the city together. During one trip, they stopped by a cassette shop where Kersey grabbed as many tapes as she could while Armin picked out a few video players. They continued exploring the city, collecting useful resources like fuel. Their bond grew stronger as they spent time together, walking alongside their horse. One evening, while they were still harvesting potatoes, Kersey told Armin about her adventures, how she traveled the world alone in her luxury car until she got lost in Syria. She and her dog nearly died in the desert due to a lack of water, but her dog saved her. Kersey revealed that she hadn't seen any other humans during her travels, which led her to eventually head to Berlin. Armin remarked that Berlin was boring and advised her not to go, saying there was no point in traveling the world, it was just a waste of energy. This conversation highlighted their contrasting personalities. Armin preferred staying in one place, while Kersey had a thirst for adventure. The next day, Armin went to the river to repair his water wheel, and this time he succeeded, generating water-powered electricity. Kersey cheerfully brought home some game she had hunted, but Armin coldly remarked that their pantry was already well stocked, which annoyed her. She ended up dragging the game inside by herself. That night, Armin turned off the diesel generator, causing the power to go out. Kersey angrily confronted him, but Armin calmly showed her the new water-powered energy system he had installed, which was working perfectly. That evening, Kersey was deeply engrossed in watching a soap opera. Armin tried to be romantic beside her, but his awkwardness in seduction irritated Kersey, who snapped at him. Calmly, Armin stepped outside and saw something astonishing. He urged Kersey to come out, and together they witnessed a giant deer staring at them. Kersey was frightened, but moments later, the deer disappeared. Later, as they slept, Armin heard a gunshot. He woke up to find Kersey standing guard, clearly panicked, fearing that wild animals might be approaching their home. The next afternoon, the couple made love by the river after swimming. However, Kersey suddenly became upset when she realized that Armin hadn't used protection. Armin casually responded that he wanted to have a child and thought it was a good way to restore everything. Unfortunately, Kersey felt differently. She didn't want to give birth in the middle of a catastrophe like this. Armin replied that he liked the world as it was, to which Kersey retorted that he only liked making love. She left angrily. When Armin returned home on his horse, he saw Kersey leaving in her truck from a distance. That night, Armin found himself lonely again, drinking wine with regret. He watched a romantic film on his laptop until a large vehicle suddenly parked in front of his house. Armin went into the van and saw Kersey holding a dog. Kersey cheerfully told him that the truck had now become their new home. The couple sat together, and Kersey shared a story about her past relationship. She told Armin that her ex-boyfriend of 7 years had hidden a son from her, which made her realize that time spent together doesn't guarantee truly knowing someone. After such a betrayal, Kersey no longer wanted to have children. After sharing her story, Kersey invited Armin to join her on her mission to travel the world, but Armin questioned what would happen to their home and the animals they had. Their conversation ended there. That night, they found a store to gather supplies. As Armin was about to return to the vehicle, he suddenly started dancing under the truck's lights. He invited Kersey to join him, trying to charm her into staying with him. Kersey happily accepted his invitation, and they danced together. The next morning, Armin drove the van back home, but he deliberately steered it into a field, causing the tires to get stuck and punctured. Kersey became angry, as she was planning to leave and travel the world the next day. Armin tried to convince her not to go, but Kersey insisted that he should just change the tire. The following day, Armin returned after fixing the tire and handed the keys to Kersey. He asked if she would come back, but Kersey only told him not to wait for her. Armin asked what would happen if she got pregnant, but Kersey remained silent and simply thanked him for letting her go. As Kersey was about to leave, Armin suddenly changed his mind and decided to go with her. He asked for 5 minutes to gather his things and rushed to release his animals. However, he soon heard the sound of the engine, and when he looked outside, he saw that Kersey had already left. Despite this, Armin believed that Kersey would return someday, and the film ended there. And that's the summary of the film. Of course, many may be confused by the plot of this movie, as it never explains why humans suddenly disappeared or why the man, who initially seemed incompetent, suddenly gained so much knowledge. Even by the end, the relationship between the man and woman remains unclear and illogical. In my opinion, this isn't really a typical science fiction film, but rather a character study about how someone views life and the people around them. Armin represents a man who feels socially alienated, left behind and unable to take care of himself. He doesn't fit in with his surroundings and behaves apathetically, lacking any real commitment. He lets life flow by, coming and going without taking control. However, this mindset changes halfway through the story, when everyone in his surroundings disappears. Armin suddenly feels energized, able to live independently in the forest. He becomes more caring toward animals, highly productive, heals his own wounds and gains confidence. He doesn't even try to find out what happened to everyone, showing that he enjoys the solitude. By the end, he meets Kersey, and it becomes clear that they are incompatible. Yet he lets her go even though he knows she might be pregnant. Kersey represents the opposite personality, someone who seeks answers and wants to restore the world, while Armin, on the other hand, is content with the way things are. In the end, Armin is more comfortable and free when he's alone. He occasionally needs companionship, but he doesn't offer any commitment. As the title, In My Room, suggests, the film depicts a person who thrives in solitude, but struggles with social interactions and togetherness. And that's it for the story series of this film. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribe, like and share. See you in the next video. Goodbye.